We have some new border news to get to. First off, some New York City high school students will be getting 2020 flashbacks, so they'll be forced to return to virtual learning. Why? Well, their school is being used to shelter migrants. Students at James Madison High School giving up their classroom for thousands of asylum seekers following an intense storm that destroyed the shelter the migrants were being housed in. Next up, the Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas allegedly admitted the current release rate for migrants crossing the border illegally is above 85% per 3 Border Patrol sources. The DHS not commented on that matter yet. And then President Joe Biden has asked Mexico for help to halt the record surge of the migrants, per NBC News. Mexico, however, has its own list of wants in return. Mexican President Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador calling on the United States to approve a plan that would deploy $20 billion to Latin American and Caribbean countries, suspend the U.S. blockade of Cuba, remove all sanctions against Venezuela, and grant at least 10 million Hispanics living in the U.S. the right to remain and work legally, according to NBC News.
A 400-person brawl broke out outside a New York City migrant center this past weekend, and one person allegedly tried to skip the line. According to the New York Post, one man punched the line cutter and fell to the ground as another joined the physical scene.
Absolutely. So first, the school story is very interesting. I saw a lot of complaints about that. From my standpoint, not so much on the need to house the migrants, given the storms that were going on, but the return to virtual education for the students disrupted by that. I saw Nate Silver tweet, and this has basically been confirmed by our experience during COVID, that virtual learning is like not having learning at all. So you might as well just say classes are canceled for that day. It seems a lot of people very upset about that kind of disruption. Like, oh, it's no bother, no worries, we can just do virtual education, even though we know that doesn't work for an extraordinary number of students.
Robby, it was for like 1 or 2 days. The original evacuation plan, to be clear, there was a strong winter storm of 60-mile wind gusts. The tent camp where these people were staying, including kids and pregnant women, got destroyed. And in anticipation of it getting destroyed, they had an emergency evacuation into this school, which is a designated evacuation center. The immigrants were supposed to be out by the next morning. There were obviously logistical concerns in getting a new place for them to go, and so they were delayed. And so they had remote schooling for a day. So I appreciate your concerns about long-term COVID-era schooling. This is not a return to 2020. It's an emergency situation where to save the lives of people who were confronted with a winter storm, they took emergency shelter in a school. Here's a comment, and I know that a lot of people on the internet were very upset about it, but some very good reporting by the city of New York spoke to some students and families at the school. One 16-year-old junior named Spencer Katz said students learned about the evacuation on Tuesday afternoon and that most of the discussion focused on whether or not school would be canceled on Wednesday. He said, I was expecting some people to be racist, but I was pretty pleasantly surprised by how cool everyone was about it. Every single person I know has an immigrant as a parent or grandparent, so everyone was pretty understanding. So I would caution against using a local event where the people involved, I'm sure there were some people at the school who were irritated by it. Nobody wants these kinds of disruptions, but the context of it is to prevent people from getting injured or killed during a weather event. Are we really so lacking in humanity that we're going to say, oh my gosh, 1 day of 10th grade was missed and we shouldn't have that happen. Instead, we would want a pregnant woman to be caught in a tent in a 60-mile wind gust storm? Is that where we are?
Let's just admit the classes are canceled. It's the virtual part. Like virtual school is a joke. We know it's a joke. They should just call it a snow day, move on. You're right, it's just 1 day. That doesn't matter. But the idea that school can just go virtual whenever there's some inconvenience, and there's no declining quality is like totally contradicted by the COVID experience. I've seen going to virtual for other reasons in school districts, and this is too easily, in my view, a tool that's being deployed. Of course, they were not supposed to just let the migrants die in the storm. It speaks to the need to establish a more suitable process for housing and processing and working through these claims and dealing with the migrants coming in some kind of sustainable way. Obviously, there's a lot of frustration about that happening at the border. I don't disagree that they should have used the temporary shelter. I disagree that the idea that we can just say, well, it's virtual, so good. It's like the same thing. It's clearly not. We all have to recognize that virtual school is a farce.
That's fine. I think it's better to be able to have virtual school than to have classes canceled at all for the day. But if you would prefer, for optics reasons, you think it validates the appropriateness of virtual schooling in a way that is destructive, to have them have simply canceled class, I don't have a bone in that fight. But I think this is a story about a community that was willing to sacrifice to save the health and well-being of others in their community, and it should be a beautiful story about what it can mean to come together as a country. And if we want to have a critique of why there hasn't been more, perhaps, funding allocations and support for immigrants to have a more permanent shelter, asking questions like, why were they being sheltered in these tents to begin with when there is so much vacant housing, elite, full, multi-million-dollar housing that sits vacant in New York City, largely because there's so many people, including foreign investors, who come in and buy up this housing stock and keep it empty. That, I think, is a productive conversation to be having. Why is the onus on school children as opposed to on people who have a much bigger capacity to absorb the cost in this kind of a crisis? But to try to pit those two vulnerable communities against each other and to try to characterize the response to this event as overwhelming anger, when it sounds like the members of the community that were actually impacted are thoughtful about this and who see themselves as coming from a very similar immigrant tradition, like so many people in America and so many people in New York specifically being such a hub for immigration, seeing themselves in the immigrants that are having to sleep on the floor in their classrooms, not exactly an ideal scenario either, but to keep themselves from dying in a storm. I don't know. I see this a little bit differently.
No one was expected to sacrifice more than our school-age children during COVID. I would agree. Let's find accommodations elsewhere. It's all of these supposedly empty office buildings or hotel buildings. Maybe they can take some migrants rather than asking our school-age children to sacrifice yet again when we know that this has had a detrimental impact on their educational opportunities. But meanwhile, House Republicans are reportedly plotting a swift impeachment of Secretary Mayorkas, as swing state Republicans have recently expressed openness to that idea as migrants surge across the southern border. Per CNN, Representative Anthony D'Esposito, a freshman congressman from New York, said, "From the far right and the Freedom Caucus to those more moderate, we have all been a part of this. I think we are at a point, and I believe that the American people agree with us that Mayorkas needs to be impeached, and we need to find quality leadership to lead Homeland Security." Obviously, immigration being an issue that many Republicans run on, that Donald Trump talks about a lot as we're going into the 2024 campaign cycle. Do you think a perceived weakness on the immigration issue is going to really hurt Joe Biden as long as Mayorkas remains in his position?
No, I think Joe Biden's going to be much more hurt by the fact that he has continued so many of Donald Trump's policies, building the border wall, pretty aggressive do not come style policies from his vice president, and that the part of the base that he risks losing is the part that are progressives and that want a humane immigration system, that want more funding for administrative law judges to actually process people who have a legitimate immigration claims instead of undermining the promises of our Constitution and the language emblazoned on the Statue of Liberty that our country was once very proud of.
Obviously, most Republicans overwhelmingly support building a border wall and more funding for border security. Many Democrats are opposed. Independents somewhat split, but slightly more supportive of increased border funding as far as this poll
That's
shows.
important point. People are supportive of more border funding, because border funding, as I just pointed out, can be used to do things like have more staff to process these various immigration
Well, I mean,
claims.
I was talking specifically about the wall, but...
and this is a point that the White House brought up, I think not as forcefully as it should, that Republicans are exacerbating the border crisis by blocking the funding that could go to mediating this crisis. I think this was about a week ago. White House spokesperson Andrew Bates said in a statement that Republicans have an anti-border security record because they obstructed President Biden's proposals and voted against border security funding. That's from reporting in The Hill.
Well, it is border wall funding specifically that Democrats oppose and Republicans say they support. So if you want more funding for immigration, I guess I'm not sure who you're supposed to.
Well, Biden has, in fact, pledged to build more border wall funding. In fact,
But you think he shouldn't do that?
No, don't think he should. But this is why this criticism is kind of absurd. The people who are mad at Biden are mad because he used executive authority to bulldoze through certain environmental regulations so that they can continue to build Trump's border wall. Biden is literally doing everything that Trump did, what Republicans want him to do. And somehow the media framing is Biden needs to be Freudian slip. Biden needs to be more aggressive and more conservative on this issue. At the same time, Republicans, instead of taking the win and enjoying what Joe Biden is doing and actually giving him the funding to continue both Trump's policies and to do, I think, progressive interventions that will have the effect of actually stemming the crisis at the border, which they say that they want, they're blocking that as well. Republicans benefit from the perception that there is a border crisis, and they will create a border crisis in order to win elections. That's the problem.
Perception that there is a border crisis?
Yeah.
I think it's more than a perception to a lot of people.
I'm not saying there isn't a problem, but they benefit from that problem. So they are going to exacerbate any media around it. They want it to be a bigger problem. They want to pump up the perception. People, whether or not there is one, But the point is that they benefit from the perception of there being one, regardless if there is. And so they will always use the same language, regardless of whether or not there's ebbs and flows in the crisis. The same way that they had manifested a perception that there has been a rise in violent crime over the last couple of years when it has in fact gone down, a rise in shoplifting when it hasn't. Don't sit here and cite to me, Robby, the specific stats for Washington, D.C. You've been very clear about that. But although we have not covered it on this program, it has been a major news story that crime rates have gone down across the country. Violent crime has gone down across the country, and there has been now an admission that all of the media reports about the increase in shoplifting was a lie, that they were not true, and that there was a fabrication put out by companies to disguise the extent to which they were having profit failures. They weren't selling as many goods, and they wanted to blame the closures of their stores on shoplifting as opposed to their poor performance so they could sell that story better to their shareholders.
Violent crime went way up during the pandemic and immediately following. It has thankfully retreated, you're right, in most but not all major cities. I don't have the shoplifting statistics handy right now. Obviously, we have seen video after video. I guess we're supposed to ignore that, of convenience stores being vandalized all over California, all over major cities. I don't know what the statistics are, but I guess people can look that up in society.
Yep, there is. You can read a number of reports, including this one from the National Criminal Justice Association, saying that shoplifting is down in the United States despite widespread theft narrative. It was
down
also reported in the New
York
York Times.
But increased in recent years.
The council tracks 24 major U.S. cities. Overall shoplifting incidents were 16% higher in the first half of 2023 than the first half of 2019. When New York City is excluded, however, reported shoplifting incidents fell over the same time period. Out of the 24 cities, 17 reported decreases in shoplifting. So what it's saying is that New York in particular seems to have been driving some of the localized spike and the perception of that there was a spike, but in fact it is down overall. Outside of New York, shoplifting incidents in major cities have fallen 7% since 2019.
But up in New York, in D.C., and in California, yes, it is. We're a large, diverse country, and I'm glad it's not going up everywhere. But you can't gaslight people into thinking there's no shoplifting problem in the country when they can see the videos every day being posted all over social media. So decide for yourselves. I guess that does it for us on Rising Today. Tomorrow we'll be back to give you the news we know you need. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any of our content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we're now available anywhere podcasts are as well. Bye-bye.